Good morning or afternoon or evening, whatever it is. My name's Chase Cunningham or Dr. Cunningham or Dr. Zero Trust, depending on if you're, want to be formal or if I'm in the mood to listen to that. I've got Karim from LastPass here. I've been hoping to get to talk to you. So Karim, why don't you get a sort of quick background on who you are and what you do, and then let's go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, sure. Great. Thanks for having me. So my name is Karim Toubba. I'm Chief Executive Officer of LastPass. Been on board just over 3 years ago. Joined the company in the May of 22 timeframe and been in cyber pretty much my whole career.
So let's jump into kind of the elephant in the room that I think most people would be most interested to see from a CEO's perspective. You guys went through an issue. I don't even know if I want to call it what the media says and breach and whatever else, but like to describe that whole thing and how that happened. And I also think that the market has not given some of these companies like yourself a fair shake on how well you've done recovering from that. So let's explore that whole thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so let me maybe set the background and the context. So I came on board, as I said, in sort of like April, May timeframe of 22. And about 2.5, 3 months after I got here, we had a pretty major breach. It was sort of a subsequent two breaches, one in August of 22 and then one in September, where the attackers were able to get access to a backup of all the user vaults. They were encrypted. They got the cipher out. And what precipitated from that was just a tremendous amount of assessment and work within the organization to really kind of first assess and triage what had been happening as part of the traditional incident response process, and then work through that to really identify the areas that were responsible for the actual breach. But then we obviously had to go much deeper because the breach was on the infrastructure side, and we kind of went back and looked at the entire company candidly, everything from the infrastructure and the commensurate controls that were in place from endpoint to network to a broader set of applications, both cloud and on-prem. Well, then we went back and also looked at everything as it related to the application, and also a lot of things related to culture, right? Like we really needed to shift the mindset of people because we eventually rolled out YubiKeys all the way down to the corporate issued smartphone. So every 24 hours, I have to put my YubiKey into my smartphone to re-authenticate as part of that process. And so a lot of that was really trying to make people understand that if you're going to be a cyber company, you got to make a meaningful and sustained investment. But that change takes a ton of time, a ton of commitment, a lot of dollars, and commitment all the way up to the board level, right? Which was really important to get right.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that that's super interesting. So, where did the whole thing kind of, in your opinion, go sideways? Was it just that there was, typical kind of corporate stuff before that, and then breaches happen because everybody gets breached? I mean, the U.S. government's been breached, and they spend God knows how much money a year. But like,
Right.
is this was this a culmination of things, or was this a crazy one-off NSA super hacker type deal?
Yeah, I mean, look, we're as you probably know, we're not in the attribution space, even though we brought in third parties to assess. So we never got full attribution of who the attacker was. I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, 0 being like some script kiddie, 10 being like some super state nation actor. Our estimate is it was pretty sophisticated. By looking at the TTPs and looking at the attack path and looking at the sort of the connecting of the two incidents together, it's pretty clear to us that, there was real intent and some patience from the attackers, although we were never able to clearly track back to attribution. In terms of kind of like where kind of this started and was it the culmination of events? I mean, like you said, everybody does get popped. It's not an if, it's when, and whether or not you're serious. I mean, I think if you look at the company today, we're clearly in a position where we've truly become an organization that puts security front and center, from infrastructure to culture to the application itself. And look, we've said very clearly, by virtue of who we are, the data we hold, we're going to have a perpetual target on our back into perpetuity. So let's not ignore that fact. And I think kind of like in business and in life, when you're confronted with a crisis, and this was that for sure, you kind of ask yourself a question: what am I trying to do here? Right? Like, am I trying to navigate and circumvent the real issues and kind of put lipstick on a pig? Or do I want to use this as a forcing function for change? We did the latter, right? And honestly, that started with some really hard discussions at the board level, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar investment in security that kind of got us to this point where we are now, where we feel like, you're never 100% safe. So for anybody in the audience that doesn't think so, that's just a fact that we all operate once we plug into the internet. And I think we're at a position now where we're in a much stronger position with real demonstrable investments across the board, with obviously more to come because cyber evolves.
How does that board conversation go? Because I mean, I've talked with tons of folks that have been through similar-ish incidents, and they either have a board that is engaged and hopeful and trying to fix things, or they have the blame game and everyone's trying to set the building on fire so they can get out first. Like, for a CEO running a security company, how does that conversation even go?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, we're very fortunate enough to have a board that was deeply engaged and not blaming. And I think part of that is, I'd only been here 2 to 3 months, and it would have been easy to be like, oh, that's the prior administration's fault, right? But there's no value in that. And at the end of the day, I think one of the things that we needed to do, and I think one of the things we tried to get right, although we got dragged through the mud, understandably, is we kind of tried to use the customer as the North Star and said, okay, like not for nothing, but let's focus on what the customers are saying, what the customers are thinking, what the customers are feeling, and how we're going to engage. Because we had a really diverse business, right? I have 100,000 B2B customers and millions of consumers. I have Fortune 1000 names down to small mom and pop shops with varying degrees of understanding of technology, impact, and controls. That makes communication and engagement extremely hard because it's broad and you have to vary the depth. So I bring that back up to the board. One of the things fortuitously I did right after I got here is I installed a couple of independent board members. One of them is a gentleman by the name of John Stewart. John is the former SVP of Trust and Security at Cisco for 13 years, I think 13 years. He and I worked together many moons ago at a company called Digital Island when we were doing managed services before managed services was a thing. And so he's been on a couple of my technical advisory boards. That helped a ton because I had somebody at the board level that actually helped me explain, and so that the board wasn't hearing it just from me. They helped me explain the details of what was going on, what best in class looks like. And we had some really hard conversations. As an example, on March 1st of 2023, we put out a blog that was effectively chapter and verse. We got raked over the coals that it took us so long to do it. Understandably, that's a very fair criticism. But there were so many things to unwind to really get a comprehensive understanding. The main blog was about 4 to 5 pages. The sub pages that were linked were 23 deep. I mean, putting out 28 pages of technical content is going to unsettle your board, right? But I know, having been in the cyber, and so does my head of security, having spent all of our careers in cyber, it's the only way you get your reputation back. And so you got to be willing to have some really hard conversations and be very clear about what your goal ultimately is.
Yeah, I mean, so just, I've written books on leadership, and one thing I'll say that I don't think we have enough in this space, but you're doing the opposite of, is most people pass the buck. And
Yeah.
I've talked with some major leaders that are always unwilling to say, you know what, even though I'm new, they'll blame it on the past administration. So for me, just my 2 cents, gold sticker, like the fact that you were brand new to the role and you just dropped this giant grenade in the pool, and you actually said, you know what, like, I got this, let's figure it out and go forward and do good things. I can't tell you how much respect I have for you for that, because that's so missing. 9 out of 10 people that I talked to in the space would have been like, shit, not my problem, or we'll deal with this and go forward. So well
Yeah.
done there. And I think too, the one thing that stands out that people should take away from this is you guys were trying to get as much information out and let folks know what was going on. However, this was a moving target and an in-depth sort of activity that took place. So it takes time to get really good information out. And I agree, like in the social space, you're going to get dragged over the coals, but you guys, I've read it, what you put out. Like, you guys did a really good job of saying, here's the totality of what took place.
Yeah.
And that's never comfortable, never fun.
No, it's never comfortable. It's never fun. And I think the thing that people didn't totally appreciate, and look, I understand. I mean, in the moment, people were pissed because there were incidents prior to us arriving that should have been kind of canaries in the gold mine. And people were pissed. They were pissed as hell. And that's understandable, right? Like, I completely have empathy for how people felt. But, there were certain things. I'll give you an example. In the midst of doing the incident response, we were also in the middle of a spin out because we were part of a larger organization. So what does a spin out mean for the people that have never been involved in one? It means that you're literally reduplicating everything as a standalone entity. Your HR systems, your financial systems, your sales systems, your marketing systems, your SaaS applications, your underlying infrastructure, your endpoints, and all the infrastructure of security. And so this happened. So as we were transitioning, this incident happened. We didn't fully own all of the security apparatuses at the time, but obviously we were standing up a security team and built what I think is now a, kind of best in class security team where we spend a disproportionate amount of money on cyber, which honestly is the right thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, well, I love it when security leaders like, we're a cyber company, we should do cyber things. I mean, God
Yeah.
forbid, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny. There's kind of I hate to say this, kind of a little dirty secret, which is that the irony, and this is probably more true for kind of the smaller world. Oftentimes, cybersecurity companies invest the least amount by virtue of the fact that they push security down to engineering, and which is application security, which is great, but is very, very different from kind of the traditional red teaming, security operations team, and all the other aspects of the sort of what I'll call enterprise or corporate security construct and culture, which they kind of don't pay a lot of attention to. So some really important parts of the broader business.
Yeah, it's so the other question that I have to ask is, what did you do in a past life to get blessed with this misery? Did you like punch on a nun or something? Like how does a guy wind up getting dropped in with a
Yeah,
spinoff plus a breach, like all that stuff?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you need to go to church more often or something, man. I don't know
I
what to tell you.
do go to church more often. There's a fast pass to heaven waiting for me up there. Is the side for prayer. I mean, look, as I remind my team, perspective is important. I kind of tend to be wired a little differently. I think problems are a privilege. They're a unique opportunity to learn and lead. And I don't think people approach it that way. Look, I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I frustrate my leadership team because I'm pretty positive in nature. So that helped me a ton. That helped me just really kind of sort of see my way through a pretty thick fog in the moment. And then I had an incredible team. I mean, I have to tell you, one of the hardest things stepping into any new leadership role is you kind of want to assess the team. And what was incredible about this is I got a front row seat almost immediately to some extraordinary work under an incredible amount of pressure. And that gives you a perspective that would take you quarters and quarters and years to assess about both the resiliency and the grit of an organization, which makes a big difference for culture.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine a better trial by fire than just literally being dropped into a building on fire and then saying, "Let's see how we put this thing out."
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that we have a close to 60-person strong security team, which we built largely from scratch. I mean, think about that for a minute. People knew what was going on and still joined. So think about the mentality of kind of like the type of personalities that came into a burning building effectively in that moment, and the kind of commitment, the kind of gumption that they had to kind of get us to the state we're in today, and also lead through all the change. When I talk to customers and they ask me about what changed, I tell them I think it's probably easier for me to describe what we didn't change than it is for me to walk through what has. I mean, it was that systemic, and it took us quite a while, right? It took us probably a good 2.5 years to get to the point where we got to about.
That's great. So I appreciate you being willing to go into that. A lot of people would shy away from those questions, but I think we have too many people that are unwilling to have the conversation about it and learn. I mean, that's how you learn, right? Is to hear somebody that's actually been through it. So, well done on that. So following on to that from the LastPass perspective, why do people still suck so much at passwords?
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Tell me about it. I have family members that I try to convince. I think at the end of the day, it's probably two things. I think part of it is the industry hasn't done enough fast enough to make seamless authentication, secure authentication more easy for the user. So that's on us. And I think there are technologies like passkeys and kind of like maniacal focus on the workflow and the experience of the user, the cross-platform support that some of us have been trying to push for some time in the industry that I think helps. I think that's one. And then I think the second thing is kind of on the consumer side, which is this kind of hesitation to change, which is always the case for consumers. So, look, I've been using the same password. This is an excuse we hear, and I hear this from family members all the time. I've been using the same password. I know how it is. I haven't been popped yet. Therefore, but of course they don't know if they've been popped, right? That's kind of the underlying issues. And so I think part of it lies in the resistance to change, which is a human nature kind of like issue. And then part of it is just like the industry just has to continue to push, continue to drive, make it easier, keep the user front and center. Because as you know, it's one of the few security technologies that's front and center to the user. Most of the other stuff we built over the years are in the network, shims, agents, low level types of capabilities that give telemetry back to an organization and block. But authentication is right in front of your face, and we got to get it right.
But it's super critical, and that's why it like drives me nuts when folks still, like you said, they'll say, well, I haven't been popped, or I'm using the same password or whatever. I admit there are places I use the same password. However, I do use a password manager, and I have MFA on all my accounts and all the stuff that's there. And then you go off and look at the research that's being provided by Verizon, Dibber, and Mandiant Imtrends, whatever else. And it's 2025, and the most recent thing that I read said this number one password for 2025 was 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8.
Yeah.
Like all we've done is just add a few digits to the damn problem.
Yeah.
This problem is so very easily solved. Do you see a trend or anything from your customers or clients on anything beyond the typical excuse, or is it just they're they're worried that this is a hard problem to solve? I can't for the life of me understand why someone, it's to me, it's like putting on a seatbelt. Like, why wouldn't you use your seatbelt? This
Yeah.
password managers, this type of thing is just so easy.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, so I'll give you kind of two sides of the equation, the vendor side and the customer side. I think on the customer side, we clearly see more activity. In the B2B side, we see more RFPs, more requirements to solve that problem. And we'll probably get to this in a minute, but part of that is propagated by the fact that you're seeing a real increase in utilization of SaaS and AI apps. And many of those are not built into the SSO framework. So while people for a while were like, look, SSO is the answer, the reality is the push into non-SSO conforming applications for a variety of reasons has gotten organizations to stand up and go, okay, like this is a tsunami and I can't stop non-SSO integrated applications. So I have to have a capability like password management and other capabilities to actually extend that. On the vendor side, I would say, look, I mean, they're not really competitive, but I think people like Google and Apple and others that enable that capability built into the ecosystem is great. Now there are limitations. They're not cross-platform in the support. They're relegated to a certain environment. They don't have capabilities that businesses need, like more integrated sharing. They don't have policy-based initiatives. But if you can get the user more adopted to it, then the user is at least used to the concept when they walk into an organization.
Yeah, so it's I mean, we're boiling the frog if they'll use this stuff. It's I mean, I do ZT workshops with people all the time, and one of the number one things I say flat out from like start of the deal is we will be using a password manager or something along those lines from here
Yeah,
on out. I don't, and if that's not going to happen, like send me my check because I'm leaving because there's no help for you people.
that's right.
I mean,
That's right.
it's
Yeah.
if passwords and bad users clicking links are the number one and two avenue of
Always.
compromise,
Yeah.
why don't we fix that? Like
Yeah.
rocket science.
Have been for years, right?
For 15 years,
Yeah.
right? At least.
Yeah. 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 Because the network is all but gone, right? There is no perimeter. And applications have moved out of the data center into the cloud when SaaS. And obviously the people that are running SaaS applications aren't perfect in security, but obviously they're investing a lot more than all the individual companies that were self-hosting inside of sort of your traditional data centers where you were racking Sunnetra T1s back in the day, right? So I think you're right. It's the user, the browser, and the things that they're clicking on that is kind of like a real greenfield for attackers. And you see that manifest in all the reports of the data, the DBIR included.
Yeah, I mean, it's also one of those things like if like I look at the research that you guys publish and others, and if you even look at it, like let's say you were using a compromised password through a password management solution, that type of deal. And I've got some that are out there like that. I'm like everybody else. I think I looked today, I have like 393 different accounts, right? Like there's no way I could keep up with that in my brain. But the ones that I know that are compromised that I get the deep web alerts or whatever on, I've got MFA on them. So like, unless they are physically holding on to my phone or they've done some weird smishing, vishing, blah, blah, I'm not even that really concerned about it. It just is like, these are very solvable problems. And yet people still him and
Yeah.
Haw about them.
And that
I mean,
human resistance to
yeah,
change.
people suck, I guess, is the short one from that, from my perspective. But
Don't worry, we're all getting replaced by bots eventually. So it's the bots are tough.
yeah, yeah, the bots are coming. Well, I wish there's all the folks that are talking about bots in healthcare. I'm like 100% for it because a
Yeah,
bot won't be late and then they won't show up with a bad attitude. I'm just
that's
saying,
right.
doctors that listen to this anyway. So you guys also, LastPass is not a one trick pony. You guys have branched out and brought some new stuff in. Like, what is the new stuff and how are you, using that for the purposes of taking care of people online?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a great question. So we launched a bunch of stuff. I'll kind of skim the treetops, but I think before telling you about that, I think for me, the important question really is why, right? Because we were a one trick pony around password management. And if you kind of do a double click, you begin to realize, because we asked ourselves a hard question, which is, okay, what are people using passwords for? Back to the SSO conversation, especially in more mature businesses and businesses that invest a fair in cyber, a bit in cyber. And when you double click, you realize that when you talk to customers, they're using it to store credit card data. They're using it to store usernames and passwords. Sometimes they're using it to store passkeys and other information. And then when you double click even further and ask them, well, why is that data stored? It's stored so that it's easy to remember, it's replicable. In theory, it's more secure and I can share it in a secure format. And then the question becomes, well, what are you accessing? And that's where kind of the light bulb went off and said, well, I'm accessing everything else, meaning everything else that's not part of the SSO framework. And then that was kind of the moment for us where we said, all right, well, so let's step back and look at the whole chain, right? In a networkless world, i.e., no perimeter, and in a world where applications are rarely now built by organizations, but actually outsourced into the cloud in a SaaS-based model, you have the user, and the user is accessing those applications. But in SSO, you have full visibility and control over the policy of who's doing what and the authentication mechanisms, including advanced mechanisms like MFA. In the non-SSA world, SSO world, it's kind of the Wild West. What was the latest report I saw that between now and 2027, it's reported that you're going to go from like low 40s in terms of the percentage of people and businesses that circumvent IT, upwards of 75% in 2025. So
Yikes.
like, let's dispel the bullshit myth that SSO is going to save the day, because it's not. And it's not going to save the day as we did the research for several reasons. Number one is, if you go up and down the market stack, integration is still not that easy into SSO using SAML. That's one issue. And look, it's easy for a large enterprise that's well resourced, not so much for mid-market or SMB. Number two, not every organization and every company supports SSO out of the box. And number three, it's expensive. There's a great site called ssotax.org that lists every vendor and the amount of money it costs for the enterprise version that supports SAML integration. And so you begin to understand effectively that you're going to have this environment where you're going to have SSO integrated applications and non, right? And so we said, hang on a second. If you look at the value we're providing to our customers, we're solving this small of a problem, which is we're solving the authentication problem for those applications. But when we talk to customers, we realize the real question they want to understand is, what applications are people using that are my SSO framework? And how can I ultimately apply a policy that restricts access, or at least notifies the user that they're accessing the wrong application or shouldn't be, right? And so that's what we went about building. Now, look, if you look at Zscaler and Netscope and the old CASB solutions, the guys that are hairpinning traffic in the cloud, they kind of have those kinds of capabilities. They're not easy to necessarily deploy. They require agents. But we said, hey, wait a minute. What can we do with that footprint we have as the browser extension? Turns out a lot. We are very privileged to have millions of extensions deployed in browsers, and that position gives us the privilege and the capability to look through a lot of traffic. And with that, because you're sitting in the flow, you can not only look at the authentication modes and mechanisms, you can now start to detect which applications are being used and ultimately block. So that's kind of the backdrop. It's a long way of answering your question, but the context is really important. So what did we build? We launched in April, May of this year, our first product called SaaS Monitor, which is the capability to actually enable users that have the extension deployed to provide visibility to IT into all applications those users are using. And then at Black Hat a couple of weeks ago, we announced SaaS Protect, which is now that you can see the applications that users are using, Chase can go in and define a policy that says, hey, I'm going to throw up a dialogue message that says, hey, Kareem, you're trying to access Reich, but we use Monday.com as the corporate sanction program management application. Click here to go to the app, right? Or I can block you entirely and just not give you access to the app and throw up a message that says IT and security does not permit you to access this application. And we do it without any agents deployed, without any software, leveraging the footprint, completely seamless to the user, and allow the administration to control the policy. The last piece I think that was a real unlock and an aha moment for us is we tied authentication to monitoring and policy. Why is that important? Because one of the things organizations had historically is they have all these application and IDPs and authentication infrastructure, and then they have this separate kind of monitoring stuff. So we tied the pieces together. So when I show you what it is that what applications Kareem are using, you can actually further say, well, wait, is he using SSO? Is he using MFA? Is he using a password? And is that password vaulted? Meaning, is he picking it off a spreadsheet or a sticky or is from his head? Or is it actually being filled and grepped or gotten from or retrieved from an actual vault, like a password manager? So we tie that together and we make it dead easy to kind of deploy and really non-intrusive to the user, back to the point about, trying to drive the right behavior by making things simple.
And so this is applicable for SMB, regular consumer, enterprise. Who's the target market for
Yeah.
this?
So, I mean, any and all businesses, not so much consumer yet. I think there are, you can imagine parental control type capabilities that could apply in that way, integrated into it, which would be those are things we are discussing, but we targeted primarily businesses and candidly businesses of all sizes. What I would say is our sweet spot is SMB and commercial, but I say also enterprise because there's this thing that's been happening in security forever and a day, and that people think about enterprise like the big banks and the big retailers and insurance companies that spend a lot of money on cyber, understandably. But I talk to a ton of enterprise customers that have 8, 9, 10,000 people that have a security team that dwarfs ours and a budget that is smaller than ours. And we're, close to 1,000 people. I talked to a customer the other day, 8,000 employees in manufacturing, 2,000 on the shop, 6,000 knowledge workers, and they have a CISO and a team of 7, right? And so, do we sell to the large banks of the world? No, but we have many, many enterprises and growing that have kind of real needs that don't have incredibly large budgets and sophisticated teams.
Super cool. Last point, I always like to kind of leave people with, walk away. And there's so much about, the right things to do involved. I always like to say, from your perspective, what's something that you would tell somebody not to do? And this can be across the board or maybe during a response or whatever. But if you were going to tell somebody that's coming up in this space, don't do this, what would that be?
In terms of like building a product or in terms of leadership or
Whatever blows your hair back, man.
Oh, that's a good one.
I always like this question because people are never ready for it and they have to actually think.
No, it's good. It takes a second to Well, I'll give you one that I kind of learned through this. I knew it before, but I really learned it through this experience. Don't ever be anybody but yourself. People don't appreciate people that aren't authentic, right? Don't bullshit. Be who you are. Because I think, I'm 54 and, I've been at this 31 years and I thought I'd seen a lot. And the last 3 years were, I've said this publicly before, the hardest 3 years of my career. And I learned a ton. And I think one of the things I learned is that if you are who you are and you're clear about what you're doing, people will follow. And that was a really kind of reinforcing and important message, especially for people coming up that are kind of trying to figure out and that applies both to your leadership personality, but also your career goals. Because many technical people, I started on the technical route, come to that fork in the road. Am I going to be a super deep technical person or am I going to be a leader? Right. And you have to be authentic of who you are, but also to how you make decisions about how you're going to progress. What truly interests you, right? Where do you really think you'll get satisfaction and make a meaningful difference? Because life is short. And, at the end of the day, it's kind of an important lesson to learn. And the sooner you learn it, the happier you'll be.
There you have it, from your lips to God's ears. So folks, if you're listening to this, look for Karim and LastPass out there. They're doing good stuff. They are miles beyond things that have happened in the past. And I would argue that any company that's responded to things as well as they have deserves a solid opportunity to have that conversation with you. So, Kareem, thanks for jumping on LastPass. I appreciate y'all's time, and we'll see where things go from here, and we'll catch up on the far end.
All right. Good. Thanks, Chase.